Welcome to Tech Primers. In this video, we are going to create a simple Spring reactive application using the latest Spring Boot 2.0.0. Okay, right now if you see Spring Boot is in the candidate release version, so I'm going to use the M3 version of Spring Boot, and this is going to use the Spring 5, which is going to have lots of features which are dedicated to the reactive streams and the reactive world. So that is what we are going to see in this particular video. So I'm going to create a small application which is going to be exposing reactive endpoints, right? So that's what I'm going to do. So it's going to use Spring Reactive Framework. So we are going to see what are all the different new classes which got created as a part of the Spring 5 or the reactive framework inside Spring. So which is called the Reactive Spring. Okay, there are documentations around these, the release notes and stuff like that. You can check that out if you want to see in depth of what they are. So I'm going to cover some of the features of Reactive Spring in this video, and also I'll also create a series where you can I'll show you different features of the Reactive Spring which can be used in different parts. So right now what we are going to do is we are going to create a simple reactive service, okay, which is going to connect to the MongoDB, and then we are going to stream the data from the MongoDB to the client side. So what we are going to do is we are going to create a server which is going to be a reactive server using Spring Reactive. It's going to emit some streams. That's what we are going to see. So I'm going to create a package tech primers reactive. I'm going to name this as Spring, let's say, reactive Mongo. So it's going to use MongoDB. So I'm going to say reactive Mongo example, and I'm going to name it as one. Okay. So the dependencies which we are going to use is we are going to use reactive Mongo, okay, and also we are going to use reactive web, okay, that is going to use the Spring Webflux. So we are going to see what is Webflux. So before that we'll just create a dependency. So we need these reactive Mongo and the reactive web. That's it. We are not going to do anything. So I'm just creating this project. Okay, it's getting opened. Let me maximize the window. Yeah, so let's go to the pom.xml. So that is where we are going to see what are the dependencies which are added as a part of Webflux and the reactive Mongo. So if you notice here, there are two different dependencies. One is called the Spring Boot Starter Data MongoDB Reactive. So this is the Spring MongoDB dependency, and the next one is the Webflux. So Webflux is going to have the new packages which are packaged inside the Spring Reactive framework. So Webflux is going to be the framework which is providing all those. So let's go inside Webflux and see what do they have. So they have something called Spring Webflux. Okay, so this is nothing but the Spring Webflux which you get as a part of Spring 5. Since the Spring Boot is what we are using, so we have a Spring Boot Starter Webflux. Okay, and it has the Spring Web by default. So that is why we didn't add any Spring Web dependencies, because this is going to bring the Spring Web dependency by default. It has Hibernate, it has Netty. Now you can use Netty server for running your application. So Spring Boot is going to help you in running your application inside Netty as well. So right now Spring Boot with the reactive is the first application or the first framework which is going to support Netty out of the box. So let's get started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some services. So I'm going to use some port. So by default I'm going to use some port as 8082, let's say, right? So I'll go ahead and create some resource. So let's start from the resource, right? That's how we start. So we will create some REST endpoints which we can expose, right? So that's what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to create a Java class called employee resource, right? As usual I'm going to use the Spring MVC kind of notation. So I'm going to use the REST controller, and I'll just say REST request mapping, and I'm going to say employees, right? REST slash employee. So I'm going to say REST slash employee. So what we are going to do is, first let's do a get mapping, and then I'll just say give me the list of employees, right? So here what do we do in a traditional style is we used to do this, right? So we just say get all. In a traditional Spring MVC application, what do? We just say this and then we return a list of employee. So in the reactive world, what we have is something called mono, okay, and something called flux. So it's not getting detected. So let's go ahead and check mono, right? So meanwhile I'll show flux as well. So if you see here, mono and flux are two new what do you call the two new interfaces. If you see, I think it's abstract class, so sorry for that. So mono is an interface. If you see, it is implementing from the publisher. So mono, if you will use mono when you want to return one data out of the reactive stream, so that is when you use mono. Okay, it can accept any types, and there are lots of methods inside this class. So you can use if you are using, or if you are using a data which is going to return only one element, then you can use mono. Okay, so that is when mono is used. Even if it is a reactive stream, mono is used where you will have only one finite element. Okay, so flux is something similar to mono, but it is going to return multiple elements. So if you are using mono, you will have one element, and if you have multiple elements to be returned, then you use flux. So in our case, if you notice in the resource, what we need is a flux in this case, right? Because we are going to return stream of data. Okay, you are going to return a bunch of data, so that is why we need a flux. Okay, and I'm going to create a model called employee. So let's create the model. I'll just create it under model class, model package. So I'm going to use MongoDB. So I'm going to annotate it with document. Okay, so this is going to get converted into as a document, right? So one of the viewer requested me to use Lombok so that I don't have to create getters and setters. So what I'm going to do is I'll create a string ID. So I'm going to create some ID. So I'm going to mark this as ID for identifier, right? And I'm going to have a string employee name. I'm just going to say name, and then I'll just say salary, right? Okay, and the salary is going to be long. So if you see here, I had to create getters and setters, right? So I don't have to do that when I use Lombok library. So Lombok is a compile time annotation processor. So I'm going to use Lombok. Okay, Spring Boot by default has it. So I'm going to just use the dependency so that I can use Lombok here. So what I get with Lombok is I can add annotations, and the Lombok is going to create the getters and setters for me. So if I say all argument constructor, it's going to give me all args constructor. Okay, so I'll just show you. I think my IntelliJ is not detecting. Why is it not detecting? I think because, okay, so yeah, so if you notice here, I have added the all args constructor, and it is detecting Lombok. So this is going to create a constructor with all arguments. Okay, and also I'm going to say create me a no args constructor. It is going to create a no args constructor. If you just say getters and setters, it will automatically create a getter, and if you say setter, it's going to create a setter. If you want to display the toString, you can just say toString. It will automatically create a toString. If you want to do equals, you can just say equals and hash code. So it is going to generate the equals and hash code. So if I see here, I have just added annotations, and I have not added any of the methods. So you will be able to access the getters and setters here. So if I just say new employee, right, and if I just say, if you notice here, all the getters have come by default. Okay, that is what Lombok is doing. So it is a compile time annotation processor. If you notice here, I have not written any of the getters and setters, but it has already created the getters and setters for us. So that is what Lombok is doing. So you can use Lombok. It is very good if you don't want to write boilerplate codes in Java, right? If you see other languages, they don't, you don't have to write like Scala or Kotlin or Groovy. You don't have to write those code, but in Java, if you want to use those feature, you can use Lombok for that. Okay, so let's come back to the reactive world. So if you notice here, flux is what we saw. So it is going to return as a list of stream. So I'm going to return a flux. So in order to do that, I need an employee repository, right? So I need to create a employee repository. So what we're going to do is we are going to create a field called employee repository. Okay, we need to create this class because we have not created it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this class under the repository. Okay, I'm going to add it, I'm going to implement this class. Okay, I'm going to implement this class from the Mongo reactive repository. So Mongo reactive repository is a reactive Mongo repository. So that is similar to the JPA repository like how we were using, but this is specific to the Mongo database. That is what we extended, right? So we added a dependency to add the reactive Mongo. So that is what we are doing here. And when we create it, it's going to be extends here because it's an interface, and we need to pass Pojo and also the primary key. So in this case the primary key is a string, right? So the data type of the primary key. So I'm going to pass employee, which is going to be the Pojo, which is going to be stored inside the Mongo database, which we created few minutes back, and the primary key is going to be a string, right? Okay, so we have created our repository. Now I just need to inject this, so I'm adding it as a constructor to allow Spring to use constructor injection. Now the fun part begins, right? So we have created the repository, and now we need to return all the data from the repository, right? So we can do this. So you can do a find all, and this is going to return a flux. So if you see here, inside the reactive CRUD repository, so this is equivalent to the JPA repository which we had. So previously we had a JPA repository which had lots of functions, but Spring has created a new set of repositories which are named as reactive, and they are under the reactive folder. So I accidentally clicked Safari. It's going to kill. Let me go to the project structure. If you notice here, the reactive CRUD repository is under the reactive package. Okay, so and there are some other interfaces. So previously we had the JPA repository under different package. Now we are having the reactive repositories under a single package because the return type needs to be either a mono or a flux. So that is the reason why Spring has created new sets of repositories so that we can use them with the reactive framework. So if you see here, all the methods are either annotated with mono or flux. So let's go to the resource. So what I have done is I have just simply used the find all, and this is going to return a flux. So done, right? So we don't have to worry about it. Now we need to add some data into the database, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a command line interface runner. So as you guys have noticed, right? So Spring has a way to inject a class which is going to do something for us before even anything starts. So there is something called command line runner, and I'm going to say add some employees into that. Okay, so I'm just saying that add some employees into the Mongo repository. So we have to inject the Mongo repository, so I'm just saying employee repository, right? Since it is a repository, it will get by default injected, but it will get injected before the command line runner. So in the command line runner, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this employee repository, right? And I need to inject some data, right? So before that, I will delete all the data from the database because if let's say for the second time if I am running, the data would have got injected into the database, but I want to clean them up, right? Or else it will get accumulated again and again whenever I restart the server. So I need to do a delete all. So before the reactive world, we always just do a delete all and it gets deleted, right? But in the Mongo world, if you want to do a delete all, you have to do a delete all. And in order to know that the delete operation is successful, you have to subscribe to events. So you have a bunch of subscribe methods here. You have to subscribe to these events to identify whether they are done or not. So what we are going to do is we are going to use this particular notation where you are going to subscribe to the, so I'm going to say employee, okay. So this is going to subscribe. If you go to, let's go to the function. So if you notice here, you have three different arguments: the consumer which is going to throw an error, the consumer which is going to be successful, the final consumer which is going to say that okay, this has got completed, and this is going to be a runnable. So it's going to run in a separate thread. If you see here, there is nothing here. right? So that's what we are going to do here. We are going to use the runnable, the completed action. So that basically means once all the delete operation is completed, this third function will be called. So basically whatever we write here, it will be called. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save the data into the database, right? So before that I need some list of employee names, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to say stream.off, so that I'm going to create a list of employee details. Okay, so I'm going to say new employee, right? And I'm going to pass the ID first. So I'm going to say create some random UID, right? And pass the name as Peter and the salary as, let's say, 2300 L, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create something similar for each of the employee. So I'll just annotate it with, like, let's say 4 employee. I'm going to create Sam, Ryan and Chris. Okay, so with different salaries, let's say. Okay, and it is going to create new different IDs. So random UID generator is going to create new IDs. Now what I need to do is I need to stream these, right? So I'm going to stream these and using for which, so I'm going to say employee, okay, for every employee do something for me, right? So I'm going to remove this. So using the employee repository, you need to save the employee, right? So I'm going to say save the employee, right? So once I do a save employee, I want to print that particular employee detail, right? So what I need to do is I need to do a subscribe. Now if you see, this save operation is a mono again, right? So once it is saved, now what we need to do is we need to iterate through the employee repository, and then we want to know whether it is completed or not, right? So you don't know whether the save is complete or not until you do something, isn't it? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a subscribe, so that I know that the data got persisted. So in this case I'm going to use the single subscribe, so that I know it's got completed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say employee. Okay, this is going to be a different one, right? So I'm going to say emp, and I'll just say system dot out dot println, right? And print the employee for me, right? So if you notice here, this can be replaced with method reference. I'll just replace this with method reference. So what we have done here is we have iterated through the list of streams. For every stream, save that into the repository and print that out, so that we can know that it is done, right? So and before this, what we did is we deleted all the data from the repository, and once the delete was successful, we are going to perform this operation. So this basically means we are injecting data into the Mongo database after the data has got deleted. So this is the way you have to use the reactive framework. So you have to do a subscribe, because this is going to be a mono. Okay, so if you are getting a mono or a flux, you have to do a subscribe, because they are all it's all publishers. So you have to subscribe to get the data once it is published, and you can consume that. So this is how you do reactive programming. So we have to subscribe and get the data and then work on it. Okay, so that's what we need to do. So we are done with the command line runner, right? So apart from that, what else do we need, right? So we need to write some more REST endpoints. So we added for all, so let's add for a specific ID, right? So we need to give a specific ID. So I'm going to add a REST endpoint for a specific ID, but this is not going to be a mono. This is not going to be a flux, right? So it's going to be a mono, because I need to return only one employee. So I am going to create a mono here, and I'm just going to say employee repository dot find by ID, right? And I'm going to pass the ID. So here what I'm going to do, I'm going to use a path variable, because it's a path variable, and I'm going to say employee ID, right? That's it. So I have just created another REST endpoint. Now these are all basic REST endpoints, right? It's just going to return a list, and then this is going to return a single value. So I need to create a REST endpoint which is going to return me a stream of values. So that is what reactive framework is going to do for us, right? That's what Spring is claiming, that they have done some reactive implementation. So what we have to do is we have to create some events. So these are going to be reactive events. So what we are going to do, we are going to say get message mapping. I'm going to create something called as events. So you need to pass an ID. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get the ID and I will just say events, right? So that I will get some events for every ID. So, and this is going to be a list of data, so I'm going to pass this as flux. Okay, so get events, and we have a path variable. So if you notice here, I need to pass the path variable as ID. I'll just pass it the same here. I'll just say employee ID. So now we need to return some data here. So this is the fun part, right? So we are going to do some reactive programming here. I need to return the stream with a delay, right? So I want to create some delay, artificial delay. So I want to introduce some artificial delay so that we will be able to return data from the database. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the employee repository and then say find by ID, and I'm going to say employee ID. Okay, so this is going to return a data, right? So what this is going to return, this is going to return a flux, isn't it? So this flux, we are now going to use something called flat map mini. So what we are going to do here is we are going to get the data of a particular employee, and then we are going to create a stream out of the data. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap a timestamp to this data which we are going to send back to the user. So for that I need a different pojo. So because that in that pojo I need the time as well. So in the database I am storing it as employee, but I need to store date as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one more pojo. Okay, so I'll create one more simple pojo so that we can use it for transferring the data, right? And I'm going to use same lombok. So I'm going to say, I forgot to mention one thing, you have to mark the annotation with the data so that you don't have to add the getters and setters. So if you don't want to add the getters and setters, you just mark it as data, right? And I'm going to say all args constructor, I'm going to say no args constructor, and we don't need the document because it's not going to be a Mongo structure, right? So I'm going to say employee, and I need an employee, and also I will just have the date object, right? Because it's going to have the date. So that is it. So I need only two values. One is the employee, the other one is the time, right? So let's go back here. So we just said that okay, we are going to create a new object, and that object is going to be that employee event, and that is what we are going to do here as well. So we are going to return an employee event only, okay, which is going to be a flux, which is going to be a different data model, right? Different pojo. So we need to create some artificial delays, right? So in order to do that, we need to create a separate flux for that. So in this case, what we will get is a employee. Okay, we will just create a flat map stream using the flat map mini. So before doing that, we need to create a flux, right? We need to create a flux of interval. So let's say the interval is long. Okay, I'm just going to create a artificial delay inside the flux inside this particular reactive stream, so that we can see the real asynchronous programming of reactive programming, right? So I'm going to say duration. Okay, so how many seconds do we need, right? So I'm going to say 5 seconds, or let's say 2 seconds, right? So I'll just say 2 seconds. Now this is going to be a flux. So this flux is a interval which is going to return the data every 2 seconds. Okay, so this is going to return an interval every 2 seconds. Now we need to create another flux. So this is the flux which we needed. So this is the flux which we just created, right? So we need to create an employee event flux. So I'm going to say employee event flux equal to, so, and I need to create a stream of flux, right? Because I'm going to create a stream using the flat map, because it's going to create a stream. So what I need is a flux stream. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create using the flux.from stream function. So I need to create a stream, okay, which is going to be a flux stream. So I need to do that. Before that, I need a stream, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say stream.generate, okay, and I'm going to create a new stream. So I'm going to create a new employee event where I need to pass the employee and also the date, right? So that is what we said we will have in the Pojo. So I have created a stream of employee event which is going to have the employee and the date. So what this is going to do is this is going to introduce artificial delays for every 2 seconds, and there is two separate streams now, and we need to merge these two streams into one stream when we are sending it out. Because if you want to introduce artificial delays, this is how you have to do in the reactive world. You have to create a separate flux for each and every event, and then we have to merge these two. Okay, so what we have done is we have created a flux here. So we have created a flux for the interval and also the flux for the employee event. Now we need to merge these things, right? So we need to do something called zip. So if you see here, there is a method called flux.zip, and we need to zip these together. So we need to zip the interval and also the employee event flux. So we need to zip these together, and we need to do it in a different way. So we need to do the zip, and I don't care about the interval value, right? So for example, how this zip helps is you have two different rest endpoints and you are calling two different rest endpoints which are going to return the data asynchronously, and also you need to zip these together and then send it back to some other person, right? So you send it back to some other call, right? So that is when the zip is used. So you have to have two separate fluxes and then you can zip them together. So I'm going to have interval and the employee event flux, but I don't care about the interval because I don't need the data from the interval. So I'm going to say use the data only from the so let's see what this guy gives, right? So this guy is going to create an object, and if you see here, this object is going to be a function. But when I just said when I didn't select this, let's see. So when I just said this, right, so it was giving me some suggestion. If you see here, it's going to return a function of type tuple2, okay, and it is going to have a long and a employee event flux, which is nothing but the type of interval and the employee event flux. So this is going to have an object called tuple, and it is going to have the data for the long and the employee, and we need to return only the employee event, right? So what I need is the second part, right? So if I say objects, like how it suggested, right, and this objects, if you see here, I have two things here in the objects, get t1 and get t2. So t1 is nothing but the first flux, t2 is nothing but the second flux, and this has extracted the object out. And if you see here, it's just a long and a employee event, there is no flux involved here. So I'm going to return a map which is going to return me only the employee event. Okay, so that is what I'm going to do here. Got it? So I'm going to zip the interval and the employee event flux, and then I'm going to map it saying return me only the second object because I don't care about the interval. That is all it is, right? So I can remove this return statement, and I can replace this with the lambda reference implementation. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just saying return. Okay, so this is so that this is going to return the data to the user. So where is this getting closed? So this is getting closed here. So I need to return this guy, right? Okay, so this is going to return a flux of employee stream, and I'm returning the zip object. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm zipping two different streams. One is an interval stream, one is an employee event stream, where I'm just stamping the date here so that we can see that in the server side, or the from where we are calling it, right? So that is all we need. So we wanted to show how we can write reactive stream, so we have written that here, and that is it, right? That's it. Before that, I need to start the Mongo DB instance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the MongoDB. I have already downloaded MongoDB here, and it is in this particular path. I have unzipped it. Okay, I'm just going to start it, right? So this is the command. I just have the MongoD command. Okay, I'm just going to start it in this particular path. Okay, looks like the server has started. Let's start our process as well. So this is going to do an insert of the data into the Mongo database, right, with this particular employee details. First it's going to do a delete and then it is going to insert the data, and I have also added some println so that we can see what it did. And also we have written some REST endpoints here so that Spring can use the reactive APIs. So that is what we are going to see. And this reactive framework is coming from the Reactor project, okay, from Spring. So that is what we have seen. So I'm getting some compilation error. So what is it saying? Employee in the class cannot be applied to the given type, no args. So this is saying, where is this? But why is it throwing an error? It's just oh, okay, I think I added the no args constructor, right? So I just need to remove that, I guess. Yeah, so here also I added a no args, so I'll just remove this and I'll just start it. So if you notice here, the error was received at the compile time, right? So that is what Lombok does. So what is this? Actual and the format length differ. So what is Lombok saying? Cannot be applied to string long. So isn't this long? It's a long, right? So why is it complaining? Both are strings, isn't it? Let's go inside and see. So it's a string and long, isn't it? Okay. So I have a long object, but what if I do this, right? I'm still getting some errors. Cannot find the okay, the Lombok is killing me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip the Lombok and screw that, and I'm going to use our usual getters and setters. So I don't know, I don't want to deal with the Lombok, right? So I'm going to create all the constructors myself, right? So I'll just add a toString as well so that we can see what is getting printed. So here also I'll just remove the annotation. I'll just quickly add some getters and setters, and also I'll add a constructor. Okay, so that is it. So let me quickly restart the process. Hopefully Lombok doesn't complain right now. So yep, so it did not complain. So let's see what happens. Yep, so our connection with the MongoDB database is getting established, and if you notice here, the data got inserted, and that is why it got printed. So that is what we did here, right? So our data got inserted, so good to see that, and everything is working. So our repository is working, right? It's because it is using the repository to persist the data, and also the objects are all working here. So whatever employee object which we were using, right? So now we need to hit the rest endpoint to see whether they are all working via the resource. So this is the Spring MVC type of a notation for using the reactive stream. So I'm going to use the UI. So the port which we had is 8082. So I'm going to use the rest slash employee slash all. So let's see what happens. Yep, so the data has now reached our UI. So if you see here, we have the ID, we have the name, we have the salary as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this ID to retrieve this particular data. So I have a REST endpoint, right? So we are going to check the mono as well. So this should return a single response. Yep, it is working. And the last and the final one, we have created a list of events, right? So which is going to return us events of data, right? So there is one thing which we missed. I think I just remembered that. If you see here, we have created this. So this is going to be a list of this is going to be a uh, the content type for this particular response is a JSON, right? So all these three are JSON because by default that is what it is, right? However, for this events, I need to use the content type. Okay, I need to use the content type streams, right? So I'm going to use the content type text stream value, right? So this is going to return a stream of value. So I just forgot to mention that because we are returning a stream of value, right? That basically means you have to tell the receiver that this is going to be a stream of value. It is not going to be a static value, right? So that is why we need this produces media type as a text event stream, so that this REST endpoint behaves like a stream. So that is what I have done here. So I have quickly restarted the JVM so that I can just show you how it is done, right? So let the server come up, and we will be having new IDs. So I'll use one of the IDs so that I can show you guys how to do that. So I'll just quickly pick one of the ID, and I'm going to add it here and then see if it is working. Yeah, so it is coming, Peter. And I'm going to add the slash events REST endpoint. So this should return a stream of data for us. So if you notice here, there is one row, and if you notice here, after 2 seconds there is one more row. So the delay is being added in the backend. If you see here, I'm not refreshing the page, but still the data is coming from the backend. So this particular page is now like a event stream, right? So I'll just show you with inspect in the browser so that I can show you what is the response which we are getting, right? So I'll just stop this and then I'll refresh this so that it comes from the beginning. So if you notice here, the status of the events rest point is 200, right? So the status got successful, but still the data is coming. So that is what the event stream does. So it is going to use the data frames. So if you see here, the data is still coming in, but still we didn't do a refresh, and the status of the REST endpoint is already okay, right? So this is what reactive programming does for the server. So we are pushing a text stream, and it is going to behave like a stream. So it is going to get the data whenever the data is available. So after artificial delay of 2 seconds, we are pushing the data. So that is why we got after 2 seconds. If you see a date and the employee object is received here. Okay, so this is how you create a reactive REST endpoint where you can push data in the form of reactive streams, right? In the form of streams, basically. So in the generalized what do you call the media type, we call it text event stream. So that is what we added finally, right? If you don't add this produce text event stream, this is going to return only one data, right? Because it will become like a normal REST endpoint. Since we added the media type as text event stream, so the UI knows that, the browser knows that, okay, this is going to be event stream. I need to just keep it alive, and the data will be pushed to the UI whenever it is available, right? So this is how we create a simple service or the server side code in order to create some reactive data so that you can push the data asynchronously, right? So the reactive programming is all about asynchronous data push. So you can use this type of approach to push data asynchronously. So one more thing to know about reactive streams, right? Don't go for reactive streams always. So if your framework or if your project or the product is not able to handle asynchronous programming, then never go for reactive programming. Because if you are going to have your code reactive, you have to do lots of checks, and you have to make sure that your event processing is all perfect, right? So that is why I don't suggest you guys to just like that jump into reactive programming. Know the limitations of reactive programming and go for reactive programming only when it makes sense. So don't just blindly jump into it just because somebody told that, okay, they are working on reactive. Don't blindly jump into it, because most of the time we tend to do that, right? Somebody is using something cool and we just say that, oh, okay, fine, I'll also go ahead and use it, right? Don't do that. Just know the limitations of reactive programming and then start off with reactive programming, right? So this is what I wanted to show in this particular video. So there are some different functions which got introduced in the Spring 5 framework. So right now what we did is we wrote a traditional Spring MVC style uh, REST endpoint, right? I'll just show you how to do that in the router functions which Spring has created recently, so which is coming as a part of Spring 5. So that we will be seeing in the next video. So I'm going to create a similar example. I'm just going to continue with this particular example itself. So I'm going to just remove this particular employee resource, or I'm just comment this employee resource, and I'll just show you how to create router functions from the same code. So we are just going to create, instead of writing this particular REST endpoint here, or the resource or the REST controller, we are going to see how to use router functions, which are coming up in the Spring 5 framework, and see how that is different from the normal traditional Spring MVC style, because many people don't like this particular style, but I like this particular style. So I'll just show you in the next video what is the router functions. You can check what is the router functions, and then if you feel router functions are better than the Spring MVC style, you can go ahead and use that. So that's it for this particular video. Meet you again in the next video. Thank you very much.